Earlier in this module, we talked about how RKE can adapt a cluster on the fly. You'll see this later in the Rancher restore process, where we'll build a single node cluster off the restored data, then add 2 more nodes to it. When it's all done, it'll be a 3-node, highly available cluster. You can do the same thing with worker and control plane nodes. An HA cluster has 2 control plane nodes, 3 etcd nodes, and as many workers as necessary. You can combine etcd and control plane nodes if you want, or you can separate them out into different node pools. You can even start with them combined and then break them out later. All of these changes happen in cluster.yaml by changing the role of a node. Not only can you add new nodes and designate their roles, but you can also remove a role from a node and RKE will deprovision those components from that node. Just make sure that you have enough nodes in a particular role to keep the cluster healthy.
For this demo, I have 3 nodes that I've launched out in AWS, A, B, and C. I've built a 1-node cluster off of node A using RKE. What I want to do is add 2 more nodes to the cluster and make it a 3-node HA cluster. I can do this by editing cluster.yaml and copying the node definition twice and then making the appropriate adjustment. Because these nodes are out in EC2, they do have external and internal addresses. For the demo, it's not really important, but just for the sake of thoroughness, this is how I would always build a cluster out in EC2. So for node B, let's grab external and internal. Come back over here, paste that, and change the override to B. And let's do the same thing for node C. Save and exit. Here I'm not using an SSH key that has a passphrase on it, so I don't need to pass SSH agent auth. If you're ever unsure, you can always pass SSH agent auth, and even if the key doesn't have a passphrase, it'll just ignore it and it'll work just fine. And so there you go, 300 seconds in, we have changed our cluster from a 1-node cluster to a 3-node cluster. It's as easy as that.
One thing that we recommend is that you only make one change at a time. For example, imagine that you have control plane functionality on node A and node B, and you want to move it from node B to node C. The safest way to do this is to add node C as a control plane node, and then after the cluster settles, remove the control plane role from node B. This makes sure that your cluster is always highly available.